what I wanted to do was start off with a little bit of an introduction of yourself and your current role, and we'll go from there.
Sure. So my name is Lili Tomovich. I'm the Chief Marketing and Experience Officer at Barclays Bank. I am leading, obviously, as you can imagine, most marketing functions, really focusing on how do we pivot to be a more agile, nimble marketing organization, but most importantly, leading a real customer experience transformation for Barclays. And so that's a commitment we have from the top down, bottom up, to really drive better customer and guest experiences for us at Barclays across the bank and actually across the world. It's a large global initiative. So happy to be here, and thanks for having me.
Thank you. Samantha.
I'm Samantha Ryan, and I am an SVP and Group GM at Electronic Arts. And I run developers. I run studios that spend months and years building the experiences that our players spend billions of hours in every year.
Great. Arpan?
Arpan Podduturi. I've been at Shopify for about 5 years. My role is leading our offline commerce business. So most people think of Shopify as an e-commerce provider. We have a large and growing offline business of brick and mortar stores, and so helping offline retailers come online, our online retailers expand to offline, and sort of bringing that all together in an integrated way.
Thanks. And my name is Anurag Rana. I'm a technology analyst with Bloomberg Intelligence, which is Bloomberg's in-house research arm, and I research large cap technology companies. So one of the things I've been thinking about this a lot since the panel topic came. If I go back, 10 years when Microsoft used to launch Windows, every next day you'd find out it has bugs, and the new things would show up. But I think one of the biggest launching that Satya did after becoming the CEO had something called a Windows Developer Program there, where they had massive feedback from thousands of developers before even the Windows went out, and that was probably the first time I saw Windows didn't have that massive hiccups. So I think what we are talking now is in line with a concept where when you're developing a product, how is it that you get customer feedback, and at what stage, and how do you use that iterative process to make sure it's pretty robust, to say the least, and is the right thing for the customer? Samantha, you want to tell us, because you have one of the most complicated products out there, which takes years to build.
Yes, it absolutely does. And our audience, our consumers, are really, really diverse. About 2/3 of all folks in the US play games on a regular basis, and they spend about 13 hours a week engaged in our products. So you don't spend that kind of time with something unless you're really deeply engaged. So we do use a lot of data analytics and telemetry to ensure that we are creating the right experiences for our players. We want to know where they're going, what are they doing, what characters, what storylines are resonating with them, what activities are they engaging in, and we can tune that to really match their experience that they desire. We'll oftentimes cohort using sort of behavioral psychology techniques our players into groups of motivation. So some players, they will play to socialize, some will play to improve their cognitive function, others play to simply escape. So if we can understand the motivations they have, then we can deliver the best experience for them. And also, in addition to telemetry, because it is entertainment, so it's soft, squishy, and hard to guess what's going to work, we use a lot of qualitative feedback as well, particularly with what we call our super fans, where we will have conversations with them and we will ask them, what is it that you're seeking out of this experience? And then we marry the qualitative and the quant together, and that is how we engage our players.
And Lili, from my point of view, the product that you have is so different than what Samantha creates.
Yeah.
And in that case, I mean, I have a few banking apps, and some of them are intuitive, some of them are not. What do you do when you're developing that product, and what's your feedback mechanism there?
Yeah, absolutely. So it is, for us, the digital, so the mobile app and the website are obviously the most important. So for Barclays, for example, 97.5% of all of our interactions happen within digital channels, right? So a very small percentage are still using traditional channels like phone. And so for us, the good news about that is we are able to really look at data, information, get signals. We use social. Social actually is a great platform for us in terms of picking up signals that there's potentially an issue with a login with our Gap portfolio, or maybe American Airlines has an issue with the rewards. So certainly social is an area, but what we've moved to probably in the last 12 to 4 months is to really look at leading indicators and not so much lagging indicators. So when we launch new credit card portfolio products with some of our big important partners, we usually have large command centers and we get real-time data. And so we know exactly what's happening on the phones, through our website and our mobile app. And we're able to aggregate information so we understand, wait a minute, there's something happening right here. The login rate has dropped below our threshold. And so we're, bank, lots of data, but really moving towards real-time KPIs and metrics so that we can be reactive as opposed to all of a sudden we get 10,000 calls into the call center. Oh no, there's something that's gone down on the mobile app. So we're trying to get ahead of that with our data. And then of course, Samantha mentioned qualitative when we're going into market. We can talk about that a bit more later, but we too have lots of existing customer cohorts that we go to specifically as our test group, et cetera, so that we can get really good feedback before we push the first use case into the market.
Fair point. Arpan, I've covered Shopify for so many years, and frankly speaking, a few years ago when I heard about the point of sale product, I was a bit surprised. They said, that's a product for, of the yesteryears. Why would Shopify want to do that? Because it's a digital first company. So perhaps give us a little bit of history of how your group was just even formed, or, how did it come around? And then again, the second part of that would be, what do you do in terms of customer feedback when you're developing your product?
Yeah, so I think for our merchants, they're always looking at the channels that they can find the most customers. Physical retail happens to be the biggest sales channel in the world, right? And so they're looking for a solution that helps them integrate their online, their offline. We also have partnerships with Google, with Meta, with Pinterest and Snap and all the way down the line so that merchants can really find buyers everywhere and they have one inventory, one bird's eye view of their business. The point of sale business was kind of rebuilt 2 years ago. Since then, merchants have really taken to it for a number of reasons. Offline merchants obviously needed to get online during the pandemic, and Shopify was really at the forefront of that, so digitizing Main Street. The second is there's just a huge shift in online advertising, and with the changes around privacy, the customer acquisition costs have just increased so much that many online retailers are looking at physical retail as a really attractive channel to grow customer LTV, to build those long-term relationships. And so our product really has helped with that. On kind of building product, we do a lot of the things that I think the other panelists have talked about. I would say, we have too much data. I think everyone just has too much data. And so the guidance that we often take is just being really focused about who you're building for. Giving the team permission to kind of focus on one customer, one idealized hero merchant, and working with them really closely. And so we do that. We partner with the most progressive merchants that we can find. And part of our job is really just predicting the future and getting all of our merchants there as quickly as possible. So while we use data and we have tripwires around and SLAs and all the things that I think every modern organization needs to have. A lot of it is just focusing and getting the team to be able to block out a lot of the noise and focus on one customer and build for that customer.
And I would just add to that, it's really about, and all organizations, I think it's fair to say, struggle through this. It's finding the metrics that really matter, right? Because to your point, it can be analysis paralysis. Sometimes, the data comes in front of me, and guys, what are the 4 or 5 most important pieces of information we need to be looking at to really deliver the right experience and find the pain points and the buzzkills? And you can get lost in the data, and so I think that's so critically important.
Yeah. Samantha, I have a follow-up for you from the gaming point of view, because it does take several years to develop one. Is your approach different if you're developing a brand new game versus if you're kind of upgrading an old one, to say? How do you go about it? What's the process on that?
It's changed quite a bit, especially as games have become a lot more complex. In the old days, it was pretty common for us to go about 90% of the way through development before we would bring in players, but that could be 3, 4, maybe even 5 years. It could be tens or hundreds of millions spent, and then you don't really know whether that product is going to engage. So in complex projects in particular, those that are highly social, that have a lot of innovation, newer products or bigger reboots, we're now bringing our consumers in, I'd say about 20 to 30% of the way through development. So that's a big shift. And the good news for us in the game space is that our consumers are highly educated and savvy about our industry. So they really understand that when they come in that early, they may be seeing product that is very unfinished, that doesn't look anything like the final product, that has bugs, that might be difficult to use. And they have proven that they're okay with that because they want their voice to be heard. It's an extremely passionate audience that has high engagement. If their voice is heard, then we can really serve their needs better. So we haven't had any problems recruiting. If anything, it's hard to keep folks out from these early experiences.
And in the same vein, you probably have applications or online ways of entering a website or that has going on for years. How do you keep up with the constant upgrades of that?
It's a little similar to what Samantha said. So if it is I'll call it a minor change, obviously it still goes through some user testing to make sure that it's meeting the needs and expectations, and from a front end and back end and end to end, everything works. You're not tripping up a system as you're making that change. But more so and more so because Barclays on the consumer side is very much a partner-focused brand. So we run a lot of the loyalty programs for brands that you would know and love, and certainly their credit card programs, whether it's JetBlue, American, Lufthansa, Emirates. We run their credit card program. And so we work actually really closely with our partners when we're developing our products, features, and functions so that we can make sure that we're understanding their customer needs as a frequent flyer, potentially, or an elite frequent flyer, and then also our most valuable customers. And so we, again, get feedback very early on in the process. I think Samantha said, 20, 30% of the way through the product development. I would say we're very similar. We have a innovation lab where we really practice, consumer-led design thinking, and that's really about bringing that process much in earlier than we would have done 5, 10 years ago.
Got it. And Arpan, one of the examples I remember is during the pandemic, Shopify did innovations at a massively fast pace from, buy here, pick up from a neighbor, and POS stuff. Perhaps take us to a little bit of that journey as to how that happened and how did you make sure that this product is going to work and not. I also remember one that utilized GPS functions to figure out how to distribute flowers and all that other stuff in a neighborhood. It's been remarkable what I've seen it, but would love to get from the background of how that happened.
Yeah, during that time, we really felt like we were uniquely positioned to help a lot of people. One of the things that we're really proud of is during the pandemic, our brick and mortar retailers shifted the majority of their sales to online, and actually their business just didn't really miss a beat. And so we felt like we were able to save a number of main streets all over the world. I think the message just came from our CEO, Toby, and it just felt like this was a time that the world needed us, that businesses needed us, that SMBs were really looking for help. And so we lowered the quality bar for a brief period of time so we could get as much out as possible. And I think it is sort of the way that Shopify thinks about product development. Like, we are very focused on quality, but we're also very focused on speed to learning. And so we use different tools depending on the feature or where we're coming from. That can be an A/B test, it can be a holdback, it can be something that we just ship because we think it's the right thing. And it just depends on what we're doing, but oftentimes that will rely on quantitative or rely on the qualitative. Sometimes it's just talking to a merchant and doing it because it's the right thing to do. And so just a varying kind of set of tactics based on what we're working on.
And Samantha, again, your world is a bit unique, but each of these games millions of dollars to make, and they potentially would generate a lot more than that. So how do you not worry about you'll have your competitors walking in and looking at what you're doing and try to copy that? Like, how do you balance that out?
It is true that the game industry has been somewhat secretive in the past, but I do think the culture is changing. I think that the younger generations are valuing transparency, and we have very large teams, hundreds if not thousands of people. Very hard to keep things under wraps. So you might be better off positioned to simply change your approach, especially if you're bringing your consumers in at that 20 or 30% mark. You really have to establish a two-way relationship. That means you have to give them information, and they'll help you with that information. So it's what we call radical transparency, and it really flips marketing on its head. It changes from marketing very near to something's launch to really an ongoing relationship, a very community-led program where you're engaging in the open in real time, and you have to accept that. Yes, people are going to see what you're doing. Yes, consumers. Yes, competitors. Very hard to fast follow in our industry, and you have to get the benefit out of that. It's it's a trade-off, and our feeling is that the benefits from the higher engagement that you'll get if your product is really tuned outweigh any negatives that you might have from folks coming in too early. And that relationship that you form with your consumer, ideally those consumers will then be early advocates for you when it is time to launch at a bigger scale. They're oftentimes the most engaged. They're the ones that are pulling others into an experience that they feel proud of, that they helped craft and create.
And do either of you run into the issue, although your products are a bit different than video games?
Yes and no. I mean, here, the reality is with financial services, I shouldn't say this, in our business, obviously, we're a heavy co-brand business, and so if you want a JetBlue card, it will be a Barclays card. But most brands are somewhat commoditized, right? Yeah. And the brands that win in the future are the brands that understand customer service and customer experience. And so we are always, first of all, we always sort of take a look at our competitive set, what's happening in the financial services ecosystem. There's obviously a lot of interesting fintechs that are doing really, really great things. So we spend a lot of time understanding that. But then more importantly, what's our competitive set today? Who's doing what? And then what does the future look like? We always want to sort of lean in. What's the next 3 to 5 years look like, and how can we get ahead of that? And then frankly, we go into our innovation lab and we start thinking about what's the problem, your typical approach. What's the problem statement? Understanding then who our personas are, what are the things that could be buzzkills for them, where are there opportunities for those personas. And then we start sort of developing a product, right, with some hypothesis on what we think this particular loyalty program and how it would tie back into an airline program would look. And then obviously the whole testing approach kicks in. And so we're a big believer of, one, you have to build the right product for the customer with the mindset of what's happening competitively, and then where is the future of your business headed. So it's kind of a multi-pronged strategy. And I will say, listen, the world we all live in is getting far more complex. So some of this sounds kind of straightforward and easy, and a lot of you are probably already doing this in your organizations, but once you actually get in it, you realize we're making it sound quite easy, but it's not. It's hard. It's really hard.
Arpan, from your point of view, you are, operate in a highly competitive industry as well. How do you, ensure that your competitive strength remains intact, and somebody's not copying a lot of those features?
Yeah, I mean, we really feel like we're a product company, and what sets us apart is the quality of our execution. And so, like, everything that we do is about removing friction from a merchant's experience. Everything from the first run onto Shopify to how we price to the app experiences that we support to the expansion tactics that we have, from our capital loans program to our fulfillment and logistics program to the point of sale, right? So, I think, like, we are big believers that everyone is a product thinker inside of the company. If you're a salesperson, you're a product thinker. If you're in customer support, you're a product thinker. I just think it trickles through literally every decision that we make. The quality of the experience, the quality of the product, having no broken windows anywhere in the experience is something we are extremely prideful about. We have very few researchers at the company. Everyone is their own researcher. It's incumbent upon all the leaders, all the individual contributors to talk to customers and to distill those insights and to take them back to their team. So just scaling product thinking is a huge part of kind of joining Shopify.
Yeah.
Thanks. We have a question from the audience. Let me read that out. It says, what future customer engagement and product development opportunities do you see in the metaverse? Anyone want to take a stab at that?
Samantha, I think, might be playing mostly in that space. She might have a great answer here.
It is true that games are like their own little mini verses right now, and they are in real time. They have high engagement, and we have the opportunity, especially with products that are set in real life, to sort of mirror real life. And so if there are, in the future, if there are brands that are launching something in real life, they could launch something in the digital world, real life, at the same time. It would give them a lot of instant telemetry on what types of clothing items or furniture. If you think about something like The Sims, which is set in the real world, it's a dollhouse that lets our players engage with real life to live out their best life, their alternative life. What are they wearing? What kind of furniture do they want? What kind of homes are they building? What sorts of relationships are they having? That we want to make that as realistic for them as possible. And so partnering with brands is natural because it's what people do in real life.
And I would just add, from a commerce perspective, transactions will happen in that metaverse. And so we're very interested in that interplay, because I believe in the future, whatever happens in this real life will also be enabled in the metaverse. And so all brands, I think, have a role to play. And I know some of us are still tinkering and some of us are further along. But it's going to be fascinating and quickly upon us.
I think it's tempting to sort of think about the metaverse as sort of this binary thing, and it can feel very dystopian if you just kind of like think about it that way, where everyone has a mask and they're kind of sitting in this digital world for the whole day. I think what's more likely is that it starts to trickle into the way that we do work. I do think that the enterprise is going to be the way that the metaverse starts to become a part of our lives. Companies will buy these for employees. They'll be around in your house, and you'll wonder what you can do with them outside of work. And I think once that happens, certain consumer behaviors are going to start to take off. But the idea of putting on a mask for an hour a day to do a work meeting or to meet up with someone who has, shares an interest with you, those are things that feel really interesting. And I do think that that feels like a plausible path forward for how kind of the metaverse starts to gain traction.
Let me again ask you a follow-up on that. And I have seen some examples of really cool technologies that Shopify does on augmented reality. How are you currently using that, where you're at least taking the first step into a virtual world?
Yeah, we've been kind of on the forefront of AR. Primarily, I think use cases are really clear in commerce around kind of furniture and things like that, or planning or clothing, right? Like, what would this set of glasses look like on my face, or how would this desk fit in my room? And again, so I think this is just about Shopify really investing in an emerging technology and trying to predict the future and get our merchants there as quickly as possible. When we have done this and merchants have taken this on, their conversion really lifts, and you start to see how impactful it can be for small businesses who, again, otherwise wouldn't have the tooling because it's expensive or only available to larger merchants.
A fair point. So we have about a minute left. Any final words from any one of you?
Well, thank you for having us. How's that? Thrilled to be here. We could have probably talked for another half hour on this subject because there's so much to cover.
It's a worthy topic.
Yes.
Yeah, engagement is so critical, and our consumers can play such an important part of that earlier than ever before.
Yeah, and for us, talking to merchants, how we build, it's all really just a confidence building exercise. Like, how are you developing the confidence that what you're building is the right thing? That can be a handful of conversations. It can be analyzing a ton of data. It can be looking at competitors. It just depends. And I think what we coach our teams to do is to not be ideological about it, just be pragmatic. And oftentimes that leads to the fastest learning, and we sort of pride ourselves on going as fast as possible.
Yeah, and I can tell you from my point of view, when I've seen these technology companies over the last decade, you see very few big failures now because of the iterative nature of how they create products or write software for that matter. You don't really, come up with a hiccup that everything, suddenly falls apart because of the way things are built, and that has real revenue and profit implications for everybody. Thanks so much, and
Thank you.
we're out of time. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.